Have you ever wondered why Disney chose to completely rewrite one of the most brutal and complex tales in human history? The story you think you know about Aladdin is nothing more than a sanitized fairy tale designed to sell merchandise and movie tickets. But the real story, the one that was told in the smoky halls of ancient Baghdad, is so dark and twisted that it would make your favorite horror movie look like a children's bedtime story. I'm about to take you on a journey through the true origins of Aladdin, and I promise you this: by the end of this video, you'll never look at that blue genie the same way again. We're going to explore the original tale that was so controversial it was banned from multiple cultures, so violent that scholars refused to translate it for centuries, and so psychologically disturbing that modern adaptations have stripped away 90% of its original content. But before we dive into this rabbit hole of deception and ancient horror, let me tell you something that might shock you. The story of Aladdin isn't even Arabian. Despite being included in 1001 Nights, despite every adaptation setting it in the Middle East, the original tale takes place in China. Not the China you're thinking of, but a version so alien and mystical that it might as well be another planet entirely. Now, you might be asking yourself, why this matters. Why should you care about some old story when you could be watching cat videos or scrolling through social media? Here's why. This story shaped the way Western civilization views the East. It influenced everything from foreign policy to popular culture. The lies embedded in the Disney version have created misconceptions that persist to this day, and understanding the truth reveals something much darker about how stories are weaponized to control public perception. I spent months researching this topic, diving into ancient manuscripts, consulting with Middle Eastern scholars, and tracking down translations that most people will never see. What I discovered was so disturbing that I actually considered not making this video at all. But you deserve to know the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you feel. The real story begins not with a street rat stealing bread, but with a young man whose very existence challenges everything you think you know about good and evil. This isn't a tale about wishes coming true or finding true love. This is a story about manipulation, supernatural horror, and the price of unlimited power. It's about what happens when ordinary people encounter forces beyond their comprehension, and how those encounters transform them into something unrecognizable. Let me start by destroying the first myth you've been fed your entire life. Aladdin wasn't poor. He wasn't some downtrodden street thief with a heart of gold. In the original tale, he was lazy, selfish, and completely without moral compass. His mother worked herself to the bone trying to support him while he spent his days gambling, drinking, and causing trouble throughout the city. When his father died from the stress of dealing with his son's behaviour, Aladdin felt nothing. No remorse, no guilt, no desire to change his ways. This is important because it sets up the central theme of the real story. What happens when power is given to someone who has never earned it, never suffered for it, and never learned to respect it? The Disney version wants you to believe that good things happen to good people, but the original tale is much more cynical. It suggests that power corrupts absolutely, regardless of the character of the person who wields it. The magician who approaches Aladdin isn't some bumbling villain with obvious evil intentions. He's sophisticated, charming, and presents himself as Aladdin's long-lost uncle. He studies Aladdin for weeks before making contact, learning his weaknesses, his desires, his psychological vulnerabilities. When he finally reveals himself, he doesn't demand anything immediately. Instead, he slowly builds trust, offering gifts, sharing meals, telling stories that make Aladdin believe he's finally found someone who understands him. This manipulation is so subtle and so psychologically sophisticated that it makes modern con artists look like amateurs. The magician understands that the most effective way to control someone isn't through fear or force, but through making them believe that they want what you want them to want. He plants ideas in Aladdin's mind so skillfully that Aladdin thinks they're his own thoughts. The cave where the lamp is hidden isn't some mystical wonder filled with singing crystals and friendly monkeys. It's described in the original text as a tomb, a place of death that has been sealed for centuries. The treasures inside aren't just gold and jewels, but artifacts from civilizations that no longer exist. Items that carry with them the weight of forgotten horrors. The very air inside the cave is described as being thick with the presence of something ancient and malevolent. When Aladdin descends into this underground chamber, he's not just retrieving a magical lamp. He's crossing a threshold between the world of the living and something else entirely. The original text suggests that the cave itself is alive, watching him, testing him, deciding whether he's worthy of what lies within. The lamp isn't sitting on a pedestal waiting to be claimed. It's buried beneath the bones of previous seekers who failed whatever test the cave had set for them. And here's where the story takes its first truly dark turn. When Aladdin finally grasps the lamp, he feels something change inside himself. Not just excitement or anticipation, but a fundamental shift in his understanding of reality. The text describes it as a moment when the boundary between the possible and impossible dissolves completely. This isn't magic as Disney would have you believe, with sparkles and musical numbers. This is cosmic horror. The realization that everything you thought you knew about how the world works is completely wrong. The genie that emerges from the lamp isn't the jovial, blue-skinned comedian that Robin Williams brought to life. The original jinn is described as a being of smoke and fire, so vast that its true form cannot be perceived by human eyes. When it speaks, its voice comes from everywhere and nowhere at once. It doesn't offer friendship or guidance. It offers only power, and it makes very clear that this power comes with a price that Aladdin doesn't yet understand. The first wish that Aladdin makes isn't for riches or love or happiness. According to the original text, his first wish is for knowledge. He wants to understand what he has unleashed, what he has become part of by claiming the lamp. The genie grants this wish, and the knowledge that floods into Aladdin's mind nearly destroys his sanity. He learns that the world is full of beings like the jinn, creatures that exist beyond human comprehension, and that by summoning one, he has announced his presence to all of them. This knowledge transforms Aladdin from a lazy, selfish young man into something else entirely. He becomes calculating, manipulative, ruthlessly intelligent in ways that terrify even his own mother. She watches her son change day by day, becoming someone she no longer recognizes, and she begins to suspect that whatever emerged from that cave wasn't entirely her son anymore. The palace that the jinn builds for Aladdin isn't just magnificent, it's impossible. The architecture defies physical laws, with rooms that are larger inside than outside, staircases that lead to places that shouldn't exist, and windows that look out onto landscapes that exist in no earthly geography. Servants appear to maintain the palace, but they move with a mechanical precision that suggests they aren't entirely human. Visitors who stay too long begin to report strange dreams, visions of other worlds, and a growing inability to remember their lives before entering the palace. The palace. The princess that Aladdin becomes obsessed with isn't the kind-hearted, independent woman that Disney created. In the original tale, she's described as someone who has been sheltered from reality her entire life, living in a world of luxury and privilege that has made her completely unable to understand genuine human emotion. When Aladdin first sees her, he doesn't fall in love with her personality or her spirit. He becomes fixated on possessing her, the same way he became fixated on possessing the lamp. The courtship that follows reveals the true horror of what Aladdin has become. He doesn't win her heart through charm or kindness. Instead, he uses the jinn's power to manipulate reality around her, creating situations where she has no choice but to notice him, orchestrating circumstances that make him appear to be her saviour, when he's actually the one creating the dangers she needs saving from. It's psychological warfare disguised as romance, and the princess never realizes that her free will is being systematically stripped away. The wedding ceremony itself is described in terms that make it clear this isn't a celebration of love, but a conquest. The original text mentions that many of the guests report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread during the festivities, as if they're witnessing something fundamentally wrong taking place. The food tastes strange, the music sounds distorted, and the very air seems heavy with a presence that makes people want to leave, but somehow unable to do so. What happens next reveals the true nature of the jinn's gifts. The palace doesn't just exist in the physical world. It begins to bleed into other dimensions, becoming a nexus point where multiple realities intersect. The princess starts experiencing what she thinks are dreams, but which are actually glimpses into alternate versions of her life where she made different choices. She sees herself aging and dying alone, sees herself married to other men, sees herself ruling kingdoms that exist in parallel worlds. These visions begin to drive her mad, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of becoming frightened or confused, she becomes hungry for more. She starts to understand that reality is far more fluid than she ever imagined, and she begins to crave the power to reshape it according to her will. The innocent princess transforms into something that mirrors what Aladdin has become, and together they begin to experiment with the boundaries of what the jinn can accomplish. The original story reveals that the three wishes rule is a complete fabrication. The jinn doesn't limit its services because of some cosmic law, but because unlimited wishes would eventually drive any human being completely insane. The gradual introduction of power allows the jinn to slowly corrupt its master, turning them into something that can serve its own mysterious purposes. Each wish changes the person making it, and the jinn feeds on these changes, growing stronger as its master grows more inhuman. Aladdin's mother, watching her son's transformation with growing horror, begins to research the history of the lamp. What she discovers in ancient texts makes her realize that her son isn't the first person to find it, and that every previous owner has followed the same pattern of gradual corruption. She learns that the magician who sent Aladdin into the cave wasn't trying to claim the lamp for himself, but was actually trying to destroy it by tricking someone else into becoming its victim. The texts reveal that the jinn isn't imprisoned in the lamp as punishment for some ancient crime. It chose to enter the lamp because being bound to a physical object allows it to influence the material world in ways that would otherwise be impossible. Every wish granted makes the barrier between dimensions a little thinner, and the jinn's ultimate goal is to weaken reality enough that its true form can enter our world permanently. Aladdin's mother attempts to warn her son about what she's discovered, but she finds that he can no longer hear criticism or doubt. The jinn has altered his perception so that any attempt to challenge his new worldview is filtered out before it reaches his consciousness. When she persists in trying to reach him, strange accidents begin happening around her. She falls down stairs that she's climbed safely for decades. Food she prepares becomes mysteriously spoiled, and she starts seeing things in her peripheral vision that vanish when she turns to look at them directly. The princess, meanwhile, has begun making wishes of her own. The jinn appears to her in dreams, explaining that as Aladdin's wife, she has the right to share in his power. Her first wishes seem innocent enough: small changes to her appearance, minor improvements to her daily routine, subtle alterations to how people perceive her. But each wish makes the next one easier to justify, and soon she's reshaping the minds of everyone around her to better suit her preferences. The city where all this takes place begins to change as well. The original text describes how the very architecture starts to shift, buildings growing taller overnight, streets rearranging themselves when no one is looking, and new structures appearing that no one remembers being built. The citizens adapt to these changes with an unnatural acceptance, as if their memories are being constantly rewritten to accommodate the new reality. The Sultan, the princess's father, becomes increasingly erratic as the supernatural influence spreads through his palace. He issues contradictory orders, holds conversations with people who aren't there, and begins to suspect that he's losing his grip on reality. His advisors try to help him, but they find that their own memories have become unreliable. Events that they remember happening are contradicted by physical evidence, and documents they're certain they wrote contain words they don't remember writing. The real horror of the original tale isn't in any single dramatic event, but in the gradual erosion of everything that makes life meaningful. Free will disappears so slowly that its absence isn't noticed until it's far too late. Love becomes possession, happiness becomes addiction, and power becomes the only thing that feels real anymore. The characters don't realize they're becoming monsters because the transformation happens one small compromise at a time. The jinn feeds on this corruption, growing stronger as the humans around it become more dependent on supernatural solutions to problems that they themselves have created. It doesn't need to be evil in any traditional sense because it simply amplifies the darkness that already exists within human nature. The lamp becomes a mirror that reflects back whatever the user most desperately wants to be true about themselves, regardless of the cost to everyone around them. As the story progresses toward its inevitable climax, the boundaries between dream and reality become increasingly blurred. Characters begin to question whether they're living in the real world or trapped in some kind of elaborate illusion created by the jinn. The palace exists simultaneously in multiple dimensions, and visitors sometimes encounter versions of themselves from parallel timelines where different choices were made. The magician who had originally sent Aladdin into the cave begins to sense that something has gone terribly wrong. He feels the disturbance in the fabric of reality from thousands of miles away, a rippling effect that tells him the jinn has found a host far more susceptible to corruption than he had anticipated. His original plan had been simple. Let some foolish young man claim the lamp, watch as it destroys him within a matter of weeks, then retrieve the lamp from his corpse and seal it away forever. But Aladdin isn't dying. He's thriving in ways that defy every precedent the magician has studied. The corruption that should have consumed him in days has instead transformed him into something that can channel the jinn's power without being immediately destroyed by it. This creates a feedback loop that makes both the human and the supernatural entity exponentially more dangerous with each passing day. The magician begins his journey back to the city, gathering artifacts and allies that he hopes will be sufficient to contain what he has accidentally unleashed. Along the way, he encounters other practitioners of the dark arts who have felt the disturbance. They tell him stories of similar incidents throughout history, times when jinn have successfully corrupted their human hosts to the point where intervention became necessary. None of these stories end well for anyone involved. The texts he consults describe a phenomenon known as reality cascade, where the influence of a powerful jinn begins to spread outward from its initial host like ripples in a pond. First, the immediate family is affected, then close friends, then neighbors, then entire communities. Eventually, if left unchecked, the corruption can spread across continents, rewriting the fundamental laws of physics in its wake. The princess, now fully under the jinn's influence, begins to exhibit abilities that terrify even Aladdin. She can look into people's minds and see their deepest fears, their most shameful secrets, their hidden desires. She uses this knowledge to manipulate court politics with surgical precision, turning allies against each other, creating conflicts that serve her purposes, and gradually consolidating power under her control. Her transformation is more subtle than Aladdin's, but arguably more complete. Where he has become obviously inhuman to anyone who knew him before, she retains the appearance of normalcy while being completely hollow inside. She smiles at the right moments, says the appropriate words, performs all the social rituals expected of a princess, but there's nothing genuine left behind her eyes. The servants in the palace begin to disappear. Not all at once, which might be noticed, but one by one over the course of months. Those who remain report that their missing colleagues simply walked out of the palace one day and never returned. No belongings were taken, no goodbyes were said, no explanations were given. They simply ceased to exist as if they had never been there at all. Investigation reveals that these servants haven't actually left. They've been absorbed into the palace itself, their consciousness merged with the building's supernatural architecture. They continue to perform their duties, but as extensions of the palace's will rather than as independent beings. Visitors sometimes catch glimpses of familiar faces in mirrors or reflective surfaces, expressions frozen in silent screams that no one else seems to notice. The food served in the palace begins to change as well. Guests report that meals taste incredible while they're eating them, more delicious than anything they've ever experienced before. But hours later, they can't remember what they ate or even whether they ate at all. Some wake up the next morning with no memory of the previous evening, while others find that their dreams are filled with images of consuming things that definitely weren't food. The Sultan's condition deteriorates rapidly as the supernatural influence reaches deeper into the palace hierarchy. He begins to issue decrees that contradict the fundamental laws of the kingdom, ordering executions for crimes that don't exist, establishing taxes on activities that are physically impossible, and creating government positions with responsibilities that make no logical sense. His advisors attempt to interpret these orders in ways that won't destroy the kingdom entirely, but they find themselves changing as well. They begin to see logic in the Sultan's madness, finding ways to rationalize the impossible and implement the unthinkable. The kingdom's bureaucracy becomes a maze of contradictory regulations that somehow manage to function despite defying all reason. Trade with other kingdoms begins to suffer as foreign merchants report increasingly strange experiences when visiting the city. Some claim that the currency they're paid changes value while it's in their hands, becoming worthless the moment they cross the city's borders. Others report that goods they purchase transform into completely different items during the journey home, exotic spices becoming common dirt, precious metals becoming worthless stones. The most disturbing reports come from merchants who claim that they sometimes encounter multiple versions of the same city on different trading routes. They describe visiting what appears to be the same palace, conducting business with what seem to be the same officials, only to discover later that the conversations they had are contradicted by the documents they signed and the payments they received. The jinn's influence begins to manifest in the physical laws governing the city itself. Water flows uphill in certain districts during specific times of day. Shadows fall in directions that don't match the position of the sun. Clocks in different buildings show completely different times despite being synchronized just hours earlier. Citizens adapt to these anomalies with an unsettling casualness, as if their memories are being constantly adjusted to accept whatever reality the jinn chooses to impose. Children born in the city during this period display unusual characteristics that become more pronounced as they age. They speak in languages that don't exist, demonstrate knowledge of events that haven't happened yet, and sometimes seem to be having conversations with invisible companions who respond in ways that suggest they're genuinely present. The princess begins experimenting with the jinn's power in ways that reveal the true scope of what she's become. She creates elaborate illusions that last for days, transforming entire sections of the palace into landscapes that exist nowhere on Earth. Guests become lost in gardens that stretch beyond the horizon, climb staircases that lead to rooms containing alien skies, and attend banquets where the other diners are historical figures who have been dead for centuries. These illusions aren't simple tricks of perception. They're actual alterations to reality that exist simultaneously with the normal world. People can be physically present in both versions of the palace at the same time, carrying on separate conversations, eating different meals, and experiencing completely different events depending on which layer of reality they're accessing at any given moment. Aladdin, meanwhile, has begun to lose interest in his human life entirely. He spends increasing amounts of time in parts of the palace that exist in other dimensions, exploring realms that the jinn has opened for his amusement. When he does return to interact with normal humans, he seems to have difficulty remembering how to behave like one of them. His speech patterns become increasingly alien. His emotional responses no longer match the situations that provoke them. The original Aladdin's personality surfaces occasionally, like someone briefly waking from a deep sleep. During these moments, he experiences flashes of horror at what he has become and what he has allowed to happen to those around him. But these episodes become shorter and less frequent as time passes, until they eventually stop occurring altogether. The jinn reveals to both Aladdin and the princess that their transformation is only the first phase of a much larger plan. It explains that human consciousness, when properly corrupted and enhanced, can serve as a bridge between dimensions. Through them, it can begin importing other entities from its home realm, beings that will help accelerate the transformation of the entire world. The process requires willing cooperation from the human hosts, which is why the corruption must be gradual and seemingly voluntary. Force would create resistance that could disrupt the delicate balance required for interdimensional travel. But corruption that feels like empowerment, transformation that masquerades as enlightenment, creates hosts who will eagerly participate in their own destruction and the destruction of everything around them. As the magician draws closer to the city, he begins to encounter evidence of the jinn's spreading influence. Villagers along his route report strange dreams that are shared by multiple residents, dreams that seem to contain accurate information about events happening in distant places. Travellers tell stories of meeting people they're certain are dead, having conversations that both parties remember differently, and discovering that roads they've travelled for years now lead to completely different destinations. The magician realises that he may already be too late to contain the damage, but he continues his journey anyway. The artifacts he carries are designed to sever the connection between the jinn and its hosts, but using them will likely kill everyone who has been significantly corrupted by the supernatural influence. This includes not just Aladdin and the princess, but potentially thousands of citizens who have been exposed to the palace's reality-altering effects. The weight of this decision follows him through each mile of his journey, knowing that his original miscalculation may have doomed an entire civilization. The lamp that was meant to destroy one foolish young man may instead require the sacrifice of everyone he has ever known to prevent something far worse from spreading across the world. The true horror begins when the magician finally arrives at the outskirts of what should be a familiar city, only to discover that the place he remembers no longer exists in any recognizable form. The buildings stretch impossibly high into a sky that shifts between day and night without warning. Streets curve back on themselves in ways that violate basic geometry, creating loops where travellers find themselves returning to their starting point despite walking in straight lines for hours. Citizens move through this transformed landscape with the mechanical precision of sleepwalkers, their faces bearing expressions of contentment that never change regardless of what they encounter. When the magician attempts to speak with them, their responses come in voices that don't match their appearances, as if multiple personalities are sharing the same physical form. Some answer questions that weren't asked, while others repeat conversations from years past as if they're happening in real time. The palace itself has become something that defies architectural possibility. Its walls pulse with a rhythm that matches no earthly heartbeat, and its towers twist into configurations that hurt to observe directly. Windows open onto rooms that exist in different seasons, simultaneously, where snow falls alongside tropical rain while desert winds carry the scent of ocean spray. The building breathes, expanding and contracting in ways that suggest it has developed its own form of consciousness. Inside these impossible halls, the princess has begun hosting gatherings that attract visitors from realms that shouldn't be accessible to human travel. Beings of living shadow converse with creatures made of crystallized sound, while entities that exist as pure mathematical concepts debate philosophy with manifestations of abstract emotions. These interdimensional guests treat the palace as a neutral meeting ground, a place where the normal rules governing their respective realities don't apply. Aladdin no longer participates in these gatherings as a host, but rather as a conduit, his transformed consciousness serving as a translation device that allows beings from incompatible dimensions to communicate. He stands motionless for hours while alien thoughts flow through his mind, his face cycling through expressions that reflect the emotions of creatures whose psychology operates on principles that human language cannot describe. So there you have it. The real story of Aladdin, stripped of its Disney gloss and revealed in all its horrifying complexity. This isn't just about one corrupted tale or one sanitized adaptation. This is about how we've been systematically fed lies disguised as entertainment, how ancient warnings about power and corruption have been transformed into feel-good fantasies that teach us nothing about the real dangers we face. The next time you see that cheerful blue genie promising to make your dreams come true, remember what dreams actually cost in the original story. Remember that every wish changes the person making it, and ask yourself whether you're ready to pay that price. The lamp is still out there, waiting for the next fool who thinks they can control forces beyond their comprehension.